Welcome back to FireWatch Live. I'm Tom DeSorcy, and we're joined today by Scott Metzler. In our last session, we discussed the importance of relationships in leadership and how they build the foundation for strong leadership. Well, today we're going to explore the aspirational side of leadership. Leadership is about guiding people towards change and inspiring them to reach beyond. And we want them to help them achieve and reach their status quo. Scott will help us to analyze how great leaders can take their teams where they need to go, even when it's not always the most obvious and easy path, if you will. We'll look at how leadership is inherently tied to aspiration. It's about imagining a better future and helping others see it too. Scott, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Tom, it's good to be here. Thank you.
You you tell me about leadership being about change. I think that's a good place to start, because is that kind of the impetus, if you will, where it all begins? Is it the reason? And I guess the secondary question, is it the reason for each other? Is change why you have leadership?
Yeah, I think it is. I really do. One of the things that I'm fond of saying is that leadership and change are married to one another, never to be put asunder. And so, if we're going to be better tomorrow than we were today, even if today's pretty darn good, that's going to take some work. And that work is going to require some leadership. When we go to new places, we need somebody to help us sort of navigate that scary and confusing and messy middle.
The messy middle is what I think most people are afraid of. I think that's what scares people off. Maybe they don't know what the messy middle is until they get there. Do I make sense in that, saying that?
Yeah. Oh, sure. That makes perfect sense. And so, one of the things we know about human behavior is that the human brain often experiences change as loss. And so part of a leader's job is to speak to that loss, to recognize it, and to help people navigate it. And so even when the change is for the best, for the organization, for the team, even for the individual, when we ask people to end something that is familiar and comfortable and move to something that is new, just the loss of that sense of comfort is often perceived as well a loss. And so leaders, the work of leadership happens in the space between where we are and where we're headed.
When we identify, I guess, do we have to identify the need for change first before we start to become leaders?
You bet. You bet. Leadership is about helping people navigate sense making. And so if we can't articulate the need for the change is probably going to fail. And so if you invite me into this relationship of trust and ask me to accompany you to a place that I've never been, and we're really not sure how we're going to get there or when we get there, what it's going to look like, there's a lot of discomfort associated with that. And so a part of a leader's job, a big part of a leader's job, is in the sense making. And so, one of the things that the fire service does a great job with is storytelling. It's how our values get passed from generation to generation. And so, in a very real sense, leadership is about effective storytelling.
Isn't there always going to be a need for change?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, in my experience, especially in the fire service, the only constant is this sense of change. And so we've seen this over generations. We've seen this over the decades. The things that we were good at 10 years ago, uh, maybe we don't necessarily need to stop doing them, but there is a necessity to learn new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving, because our world continues to change.
You made a bold statement to me in terms of the way you speak and what you say. Without change, there's no need for leadership. And I mean, that kind of where I was leading toward, whereas, well, if we're not going to change anything, and it could be in a business environment, things are going the way they need to go. Why are we changing? Because things are working. We don't need to have leaders. But then you say management will do just fine. And I want to say, whoa, back up the tractor, because at the end of the day, isn't it the same? Management and leadership, you're telling me, are different?
Yeah, yeah. And so, in a very real sense, those are two very different bodies of work. And so, if we look at management as things, management is what we do with things, and leadership is what we do with people. And so, one way to look at this is if things, if our desire is for things to be the same today as they were yesterday, as they were last week, as they were 10 years ago, then we don't really need to concern ourselves with future changes, right? So we can write good policies, we can write good procedures, we can hold people accountable to them, and we'll probably do just fine. So management, in a very real sense, is about consistency. So here's the false dichotomy. Some people think management and leadership are opposite ends of the same coin, and that management is somehow less than leadership. Management is somehow bad, where leadership is good, and that's not necessarily the case. They're two very independent functions, and so leadership deals with seeing people through, describing this vision for an aspirational future, helping people develop skills and mindsets to succeed in that aspirational future, which might not have a lot to do with management. The confusing thing is, in many organizations, fire departments in particular, the people who do those functions, management and leadership, are often the same people.
You say also that leadership is about taking people where they want to or need to go.
Right.
And in terms of, there's a few questions around that in terms of identifying where you need to go and then stepping up and being the leader. I'm saying I'm a leader always, and so we're either going in a straight direction. That's where I get that whole management confusion automatically kicked into me and went, wait a second, I'm either a leader or a manager. I choose to be a leader. Am, is where am I wrong in that statement?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think it necessarily needs to be an either or proposition. And so some of the best leaders I know are also very capable and talented managers. Some of the most talented managers I know also exercise leadership at a very effective pace. And so it doesn't have to be either or, but I think it's important to sort of differentiate the difference between the two. And so management often is very technical work. So management might look like, as I said, writing effective policies and procedures. It might look like scheduling and ordering and maintaining. Those are all critical components of keeping the trains running on time. Leadership, however, deals with the future. How are we going to get from where we are to where we need to be, or where our citizens or our constituents need us to be? And so, if we're not looking towards the future and preparing our people and our organizations to operate effectively in that aspirational future, then chances are we're not doing a great job of leadership.
In your opinion, is a good manager a good leader, or is it more the other way around?
Right, right. Um, yeah, again, I don't know that. I'm not sure how to answer that, because I think the answer is yes, sort of, sometimes, right? And so I'm thinking about when we're called to scenes of emergency incidents. The skills that we use to choreograph those scenes of crises often is called the emergency management system. And so, what we need in this sort of idea of crisis leadership is really good managers who can keep track of people, who can deploy resources to meet the needs of the emergency incident and the needs of the people who are experiencing the crisis. So that's largely a function of management, which is not to say we don't need good fireground leaders. The leadership often happens outside of the emergency incident. It happens in the firehouses, it happens on the drill grounds, it happens in the training rooms, it happens when we focus on and invest in interpersonal relationship, determining and meeting human needs that people bring to work. So in a very real sense, the same people do those two jobs, sometimes independently, sometimes at the same time.
And speaking in fire language, as we've tended to do in this series, is talk about the transition, if you will, where we have transitional operation fire attacks, where we change from offensive to defensive. So is it important as a manager / leader that you do transition when it's needed, when it's necessary?
You bet. Yeah. So, we talked in some of our previous conversations about the idea of technical challenges versus adaptive challenges. And one of the hallmarks of the adaptive leadership framework is this idea that one of the biggest leadership failures is trying to apply a technical solution to an adaptive problem. And so, if we try to manage our way through a situation that requires leadership, uh, chances are we're not going to be as effective as we could be, and we might do a little bit more harm than good, right? So we need to spend time diagnosing the situation, understanding the dynamics of the problems that people are bringing us to help solve, and then applying either management or leadership or a blend of those two.
I like your analogy about emergency management because that's a good term. And where I'm going with this is in terms of what the public sees. When we manage emergencies, a lot of people don't see us managing the emergency. We're in the room, we're in the emergency operations center, we're dealing with logistics and operations and planning and finances, and people don't see that. But what they do see is the leader that publicly comes out and says what's going on. And that's where we put the politicians, the elected officials that step up, and they're not doing any management. They're just coming across as leaders by telling people what is happening behind the scenes and what the results are of the operation. So that makes perfect sense. Have you ever thought of it that way?
No, but what you say is exactly true. I mean, that's exactly right. And so, the very technical work of managing a complex incident takes place usually, as you said, behind closed doors. Um, and that, if and when those things are exposed to the general public, they may mean less to them than someone who connects on a very human level and says, we've got things well in hand. We've got experts managing the incident. The bottom line, though, is it's going to be okay. We're taking care of you. We've got good people handling this to the best of their ability, and it's going to be okay.
You don't need to know how we're doing it. Just trust that we are doing it. It's we talked about it in the series about the human work of being a leader. We talk as well about relationships. When you find the leader in your team, and I guess we talked about that, and this gets into, we'll talk about the aspirational side, where people aspire to be good leaders. Do you recognize their managerial skills for them before you think that this could be their next step?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So again, you know, I don't know that it necessarily requires exceptional management ability to be a good leader. But when we see those folks who do excel at management, it leads me to wonder, what else could they, what other gifts could they bring to the team? Right. And so, one of the things about this idea of aspirational leadership, and I use the term aspirational in a very sort of loose way. And so, if we aspire to be different tomorrow than we are today, that's an aspiration. And the gap between where we are today and where we end up tomorrow is the place where leadership lives. That's where we exercise leadership. So we're seeing people through on this journey from here to where we're headed. That journey is fraught with danger because oftentimes we don't know what's on the other side. Oftentimes, we might have an idea of what the path looks like, but there are always surprises. And so, this idea of leadership being sort of co-creational, right? So it's not just that I'm asking you to follow me, it's that I'm asking you to trust me because I trust you, and we're going to navigate this together. And so, during the course of, between here and there, we might find some things, some instances and some needs in which my gifts are insufficient. My talents don't quite meet the mark. And so it's going to require all of us to pitch in and sort of lead each other through.
It's as you said about the meaning of aspiration, and you look it up in the dictionary, and it's quite simply as you say, it's a hope or ambition of achieving something. Well, go a bit deeper, and I thought this is the kind of way I think, the mind that I have, where in medical terms, aspiration is the action or process of drawing breath, which means I can breathe new life into an organization through through aspirational leadership. I There you go. You can take that and write that down.
Oh, how nice. I love that. What a beautiful thought.
It's about, again, you might need the breath for sometimes the journey, and again taking people somewhere. Does it always have to be, as we talked about and we alluded to, the fact that being, aspiring to be that leader, but we are going somewhere? What happens if you think things are defined the way they are? Can you lose the desire to be a leader? Is that bad for an organization to not see the difference, see the change that could be made?
Right, right. Well, I have two thoughts. My first thought is, if we're not changing, if we're not keeping pace with the change that greater society or the greater world is experiencing, then we're actually not staying the same. We're actually falling behind. And so, if we're not willing to at least entertain the notion that it may be advantageous for us to look towards the future with new eyes, then perhaps we're falling short of the job of leadership. The other thing that I would say, just to kind of temper that, is sometimes old school is the best school, and to change things just for the sake of changing them doesn't make any sense. And so I think the hallmark of a great leader, the hallmark of a transformational leader, is someone who's willing to evaluate what already is, to find the best in it, and to make sure that we preserve that and bring it along with us as we move from today into tomorrow. And so, in a very simple way, what I'm saying is there's no need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because we're going to change and get better doesn't mean we have to stop doing all the things that are working for us.
And that leads to the question that once you've achieved the goal, once you've got to the destination,
Yeah.
is leadership simply maintenance beyond that?
Well, it could be. And so, one of the hallmarks of a transformational organization is the idea that we never quite get there, because during the journey, change continues to happen. And so, sometimes it feels like we've embarked on this dangerous, dark journey of the soul to get to this place we want to go, only to find that the finish line has moved a little bit. And so, this idea of adaptive leadership simply means we have to be flexible, we have to be adaptive, and so we can't be sort of stringently following this plan. We have to be able to fill and flow as conditions require, which again has some parallel on the fire scene, right? And so when we have these complex, dynamic, evolving situations, the first plan that we embark on often isn't the plan that we finish up with, right? We have to adapt to changing environmental, operational environments. And so it's the same organizationally as it is on the fire ground.
What are the challenges that an aspirational leader would face when it comes to, and again, I go back to a question I brought up earlier in our sessions about generation and the fact that change is a lot harder for some than most.
Sure. Yeah. So, even when the aspirational future is where people want to go, that doesn't mean the trip is going to be, easy. And it gets exponentially more complex when we're leading people to places they need to go, whether they want to or not. And so, simply put, there are changes that are out of our control. I'm thinking about the global pandemic. I don't know many people who wanted, I mean, like that wasn't on their bucket list. I hope before I die, I get to, work in this complex arena around a global pandemic. Yet here we are. And so we had to figure out ways of leading people places they might not have wanted to go, to do things they might not have wanted to do, which were necessary nonetheless.
So that in that particular case, that's forced change. That was change because we had to. And again, I think the true leaders, you see them show their colors, as it were, their stripes when the time comes. I can't think of any other example. I mean that's awesome to say that, because that's exactly what it felt like, and the fire service was a challenge for all of us. And I think a lot of leaders came out of that,
You
perhaps.
bet. Yeah. Yeah. This idea of forced change, um, that burnishes the soul, that burns everything away but the essence. And so people were able to rise to the challenge and, perhaps be leaders when they didn't necessarily want to be leaders, but it was required of them and they met the challenge.
It's easy to talk, I would think, about, as we are chatting back and forth, about aspiring to be a leader, seeing change, getting to that destination. We know down the road where we need to be. This is how we're going to get there. It all seems simple. What are maybe some example, or an example, or some examples of some mistakes that people may make on that road, and what can I guess fault that journey?
You bet. Well, I think the potential mistakes are manifest, and so we would be here the rest of the day if we tried to, come up with an exhaustive list of things that could go wrong as we're leading people through change. Some of the really common errors that come to mind is, again, this idea of ignoring the fact that when we ask people to change, that the human brain experiences that change as loss. And so it's easy, from a position of authority, to say, look, you don't have to like it, you just have to do it, let's get to work. Right. Which is kind of a short-sighted way of leading people through change, um, because that doesn't get to this idea of seeing people as whole human beings. This doesn't get to the place where we're meeting people's needs. We're helping them, helping see them through these really tough challenges. And so when we're not willing to acknowledge the loss, speak to the loss, and help people navigate that loss, that's a huge leadership miss.
When a person, and we talked a lot about the big L, little L, when a person comes from no L and is put in a position with an L,
Yeah.
what kind of pressure is on that person from stepping up and thinking, well, when do I become the leader? Am I a leader now just because I have stripes on my shoulder? What do you people come to you with that kind of dilemma? I'm sure they do.
Right, right. So, yeah, what I like to say about leadership is, when you see a place where humans come together and change is possible, that's a place for leadership to exist. And when you're willing to step into that place and to help see people through and to help make things better for other people, that's leadership behavior. And so, if you're doing those things, you are a leader. You are exercising leadership. And as you know, I like to say, you don't need to be the boss to do that. Oftentimes, the sense of loss that accompanies change is a values proposition. And so, there are these values that people hold near and dear to their hearts. Sometimes they have difficulty expressing them or articulating them. But when we ask them to change behaviors, ways of thinking, ways of being, often we might be stepping on those values. And so a leadership behavior that requires no rank, that requires no promotion, is to help people identify the values that might be at risk and to simply have those conversations. And, sometimes in the heat of the moment, especially when things seem risky and the stakes seem high, we often don't take the time to have those conversations. Those are leaderful conversations.
When people aspire to be leaders, is that sometimes accidental on their part?
Hmm. I think so. Yeah, I think I'm thinking through my career. I'm thinking through the organizations that I work with now, and I recognize what I would call accidental leaders. I didn't want the position. I didn't try for the position. Yet here I am leading. Right. Um, One of the things that I think might make that transition easier or simpler is this idea of simply acknowledging small L leadership behaviors and rewarding them when they happen. Simply saying what you're doing, this act of relationship building, is an act of leadership.
And again, going back and repeating ourselves, but it's important, I think, in someone to recognize that in a person.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm also fond of saying the way to change a culture is to change its language. And so when we build a shared language around leadership, when we identify behaviors that are leadership behaviors and assign names to them so that we can have this sort of common understanding of what we're talking about, we're already changing the culture to strengthen leadership.
Does it always take experience to be a leader or
You know,
or aspire to be one?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. Just like being a hockey player or being a musician or any other thing there is that we can learn how to do or learn how to master, some things come more easily to some people than to others. And so, I think some people intuit their way into leadership positions. Other people have to work, really hard over the course of a career to develop those skills.
I think that the person, again, you can use that if you want, the breathing life into the organization of aspiring to be a leader.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to, again, recognizing that. And it takes that person in your organization to see who the leaders are. And I think, and agree with me or not, I think that recognizing the leaders before change is required is going to do you well in the future, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, it occurs to me that it's hard to do excellent leadership without a lot of trust, right? And so, if I'm asking you to accompany me on this journey from where we are, where it's safe and warm and comfortable, to where we need to be in order to serve our citizens or our constituents, um, you're going to probably want to have a trusting relationship before we strike out on this journey that might not be um, the most comfortable journey. It might not be as successful as we would like to think it will be. It might have some twists and turns that seem risky and dangerous and might take us to places we might not want to go along the way. So we certainly need to, be find ways to deposit trust in the trust piggy bank before we ask for it to be spent. Absolutely.
Do you find a lot of leaders that don't necessarily share the details of the destination, or rather the road there?
I know a lot of leaders who don't want to share those pearls of information for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is they simply don't know, right? And so this goes back to the question you asked a little bit ago about, um, you know, uh, should we be having these explicit conversations about the path and about the destination? And I think absolutely. Um, One of the things we've done over the course of generations is conditioned people to look to uh, people who lead from positions of authority to answer questions. So we look to leaders for answers. And that works only to the point that those answers are available. and those answers are knowable. And as we look into the future, especially in this complex world that we live and work in, sometimes those answers aren't apparent. Sometimes maybe I, as the leader, don't know exactly what those answers are. And so instead of pretending to know them or refusing to answer questions about them, a prime leadership behavior is to invite people to co-create those answers and to simply say, I don't know what the answer is, but I bet if we get enough smart people in the room, we can figure it out together. Here's an invitation to the room.
Would you agree that that could be a number one, if you will, mistake that an aspirational leader would make, is again not sharing that information?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, one of the sort of prime examples of transformational leaders is the ability to divorce their ego from their role, right? And so it takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a lot of courage and bravery for a leader, especially someone at the top of an organization, to say, I'm not sure I know the answer. Can you help me figure it out?
There is no I in team, but there's me. Okay, sorry. We're just smashing all the myths. Thank you for this, Scott. It's been great today.
Tom, thank you.
And that is all for today's session of FireWatch Live. And again, thanks, Scott, for walking us through the aspirational side of leadership. We hope that you leave today with a stronger understanding of how leadership is not just about managing the present, but inspiring a better future. In our next session, we'll talk about the risks involved in leadership and how great leaders balance taking bold steps with keeping their teams grounded. We look forward to having you join us then. Thanks. Bye-bye.